and welcome. Namaste, Adab. Uh, you're welcome to this special episode of Peasants Rise Up broadcast series, co-hosted by the Asian Peasant Coalition and Pan Asia Pacific No Land, No Life campaign. And this series tackles issues around landlessness, land grabbing, corporate capture and control, human rights, and range of other issues impacting lives of peasantries across the Asia Pacific region. So here in this episode, we will be focusing to another country in the region, and let us hear more about this episode from our co-host Christina Sason. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Bobby. So this third episode of the uh, Peasants Rise Up series is called Milking Us Dry, Pakistan's Dairy Sector in Crisis, because we are going to be talking about milk and how there has been a corporate capture happening in Pakistan's formerly very democratic dairy sector. So our guests today are Ayman Babar, Asra Saeed, and Muhammad Aslam from PKMT and from Roots for Equity. May I ask that we start with Asra? Please introduce yourself, and then we can go to Ayman and then Aslam. Please introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Azra Talat Saeed, and I am based in Karachi, Pakistan. I work with small and landless farmers in the country and also across in the regions in solidarity with other networks operating in South Asia or Southeast Asia or to Asia Pacific region.
Hi, my name is Eamon Babar, and I work with Roots for Equity. And for the past 2 years, I've been, working alongside PKMT, which is an alliance of small and landless farmers. And with PKMT, we have been working to mobilize women from two villages, Sahiwal. And what we've been doing is that we've been researching on the dairy sector and how changes in the dairy sector with regards to trade liberalization and corporatization are actually impacting the women farmers of the Punjab region.
Assalamu alaikum. Muhammad Aslam, member PKMT from Sahiwal. PKMT जो है ना, मैं PKMT 2011 से जो है ना PKMT के साथ जुड़ा हुआ हूँ और PKMT काम करती है एक तो जो है पायदार ज़राअत पे और दूसरा अभी डेयरी सेक्टर पे जो 1-1.5 साल से काम हो रहा है। ये जो प्योर फूड लॉ बन रहा है उसके मतलब जो है कंपनियां जो दूध वाली हैं वो इसको डेयरी सेक्टर के अंदर जो किसानों को, जो गरीब छोटे तबके के किसान हैं जो जानवर पालते हैं, वो उनको जो है ना उनका दूध जो है ना अपने कब्जे में लेना चाहती हैं ताकि वो अपनी मर्जी से ओपन मार्केट में फरोख्त ना कर सकें, बल्कि उस पे दूध पे जो है ना ऐसी बातें करते हैं कि शायद गंदगी भरा दूध कहते हैं जो कि इंसान जो है ना सदियों से इस्तेमाल कर रहा है। तो अभी जो है ना उसकी बात जो है ना अभी गंदगी की बात करते हैं। जो काम करने वाला है, एग्रीकल्चर में कितनी पेस्टिसाइड इस्तेमाल हो रही है, जहर भरे जा रहे हैं, उस पे नहीं कोई बात कर रहा है, सिर्फ दूध पे आके
बाद में बस काफी है।
चलो थैंक यू अभी आप ट्रांसलेट कर देंगे।
So this is Aslam Chaudhary, a member of Pakistan Kissan Mazdoor Tehreek, and he has been a member since 2011. And then he introduced PKMT, saying that PKMT has basically been working on sustainable agriculture, and recently it has turned its attention also to the dairy sector, where the corporations are trying to take control over the milk of small farmers with livestock. And he started explaining the whole process, but I did ask him to stop and bring out the details a bit later. So he did say that they use pesticides and everything in agriculture, and now they're trying to say that our milk is actually adulterated and this is all in connection to the pure food laws that the government of Pakistan has been passing in the country.
All right. So let us listen from Amen. Amen, can you help us understand and give us an overview on agriculture and the livestock sector in Pakistan?
A good point to start would be is to say that the agriculture and livestock sector of Pakistan is very closely connected with each other, and the farmers, the small and landless farmers who comprise of much of the agriculture sector, are also the ones who have control of most of the livestock sector. And I mean, there has been a lot of conversation about how the importance of agriculture has been decreasing in the country. But despite that, it continues to contribute to approximately 19% of our GDP, and the livestock sector, which is considered to be a subsector of agriculture, contributes to close to 12% of the GDP. And similarly, there has been talk about how the informal sector has been expanding and people have been finding employment in non-agriculture related activities increasingly. But even then, it's said that 39% of the country's labor force is engaged in agriculture, and women form most of this labor force. And with around 80% of rural employed women working in the agriculture sector. And when we talk about problems within the agriculture sector, it's landlessness and the lack of access to productive resources that emerges as the biggest source of oppression. And we hold both feudalism and neoliberalism responsible for that. And there are no official statistics as such about landlessness in the region, but it's considered to be so bad, the land distribution is so inequitable, that it's said that almost it's only 5% of large landholders that have control of around 64% of the total farmland. And within that, women, when it comes to women's ownership of land, it's only 1% of women who own land. And of course, very strong patriarchal culture is responsible for that. And, of course, because the landowners have historically used both their political power, the religious power to control land, they are the ones who have been responsible for basically evicting occupancy tenants and reducing their status to agriculture labor or daily wage labor. And this has severe consequences on the food sovereignty of these farmers, on the food sovereignty, food security of the farmers, because then they're not the key decision makers about crops, and they also find it difficult to sustain livestock in the absence of land. And farmers, even farmers who do manage to lease their own land for cultivation, rarely reap the profits because the laws are so restrictive. So recently there's been a lot of discussion about two laws. One is the Seed Amendment Act, and then there's the Plant Breeders' Rights Act, which basically prohibits the use of unregistered and unbranded seed varieties for protecting IPRs of seed producers. Now, when farmers purchase these seeds, it's so expensive for them. And also because so many varieties flood the markets every year, there's no guarantee that farmers have access to good quality seeds. Most of them are substandard seeds. And in recent years, this has been the biggest problem with the cotton sector. I mean, cotton crops have said to be reduced by half as a result of pest attacks because these seeds are not up to the mark, and also they're not resilient towards pest attacks, they're not resilient towards changing climatic conditions. And the small and landless farmers basically are bearing the brunt of all of these things. And so, of course, the thing is that in the agriculture sector now, the dependence on inputs from abroad is at an all-time high. And globalization means that any crisis internationally impacts our farmers too. Just today, I was talking to my colleague, and he said that they were researching on sunflower seeds. And basically, what happened was that in areas in Pakistan where sunflowers would be planted, they couldn't do that for 1 year because the seeds come from Australia, and because there had been a drought in Australia, they had been unable to, import seeds from there. So we can see how it's creating dependency in our farmers and how it's taking away the food sovereignty of the nation as a whole. And so when we talk about the opening of international markets through these trade agreements and these trade deals, it's also an emerging threat, a very prominent emerging threat in the livestock sector as well. Because right now, the livestock sector is managed and controlled by the women farmers. But we have been hearing talk that by 2022, they're going to implement a pasteurization policy under which only packaged milk can be sold, and raw milk will be raw fresh milk will be declared illegal. And so of course we can see that no small producers, no women farmers will be able to carry out the pasteurization process because it's been made so complicated. And this is basically giving the sector to the companies who clearly do not operate in the interests of small producers. And and we've seen in India and also in Africa, there's been a lot of problems around this, that if small producers are denied the open milk market, their only market will be dairy companies who have been known to stockpile cheap imported milk. And as soon as they find that getting their supply from these small producers is more difficult and more expensive to manage, they basically fall back upon these subsidized imports of cheap milk. And this is a direct threat to the livelihoods of these women who will clearly be forced to sell their animals. So these are a few of the problems that come to mind. Should I go on? Is it enough?
Yes, I guess so. Amen. Thanks a lot for this overview, and especially what strikes me so hard is that how issues connect the people, and although the borders divide us, but the issues are so I resonate with me what I see here in the agriculture sector, and whether it is the inequity, or it is the corporate control, or it is, for example, the women, and how whether they are recognized or not, their rights, their land rights, and there's so many other issues, including wage rights. So thanks a lot, Eamon, and let us we'll come back to you in the discussion again. So over to you, Chris.
Bobby. So I'd love to ask, speaking of women, actually, I'd love to ask Azra, uh, are there any legal protections or any structural protections in place for women to protect them from exploitation, from sex violence, from other forms of um, institutional violence that may happen because of the system that Damon had just explained earlier? And is there any chance that women are being recognized as leaders in the agricultural sector because of their roles as within the agriculture sector? That is my question.
Thank you, Christina. When you talk about state control or state protection, I think we understand from our perspective in Pakistan that we are part of a semi-colonial, semi-feudal society. And when we talk about a semi-colonial society, it really means that our laws and our legal system is, first of all, inherited from the colonial system from where we have emerged. That is a British colonial system. Pakistan, so-called, got independence in 47. And then after 47, we have been deeply controlled by the United States. So our legal system is really not in our hands. So when you talk about protection, the normal person in Pakistan does not have any protection, let alone women. where women are extremely subjugated, not only under the state laws of globalization, of neoliberalism, and then a very, very deeply entrenched feudal society, but also patriarchy. So we have three different levels of oppression in which we live. Number one is neoliberalism, you can call it imperialism, in my opinion. And then we have, of course, feudalism, as Eamon just said, that 5% of very rich landlords control 64% of land. And the small farmers are just very, very small. They have at the most 1 acre of land, 2 acre of land, less than 5 acres of land. And so that 2.47 acres mean 1 hectare for other societies who do not work with acres. So the amount of land which the small farmers have is very small. And then women, historically, through the different layers of colonization and through the different layers of even as living under a monarchy before the Britishers, land was never given to women. And there is a very strong customary rights mechanism which is happening in Pakistan. So even though under so-called Sharia law, where Muslim women actually have the right to get land from their parents, from their husbands, they don't get any land. Land is never given to women. I mean, even so that takes care of that. In terms of sexual violence, in terms of any other violence, there is no protection. But I will, at the moment, only focus on women as workers, you know, because we are talking about agriculture and we believe that a vast majority of work in the fields is carried out by women. Today, we are focusing on livestock. The government of Punjab, where most of our livestock is, I don't remember the numbers, but at least I think 60 to 70% of the livestock is in Punjab, which is the biggest land area of Pakistan. No, excuse me, it is the biggest agriculture land area in Pakistan. And most of our crop production and our livestock are here because this is a very fertile area. Here, the government of Punjab itself says that 93% of livestock is maintained by women. 93%. And historically, the only asset which women really can claim, even under the customary practices, is livestock. When girls get married, their families will give them animals in dowry, which they will take to their in-laws' house, and that animal remains their property. So the children, the what are they called? I don't know what the name is for children of livestock.
Offspring.
Cubs, offspring.
They also maintained as the property of the woman. And you see, they have a very big claim on that asset. Now the government of Pakistan, I think Eamon will be talking about it later, so I will not get into all the laws right now. But the government of Pakistan is now trying to get the livestock out of the hands of women and make it into more of a corporate entity. Land, as I already said, has never been with women. Under the new systems of economic, what are they called? Export processing zones, there are many opening up, and there is news of others opening up. A recent law passed by the government of Sindh, one of the provinces of Pakistan, is that they have recognized women agriculture workers, and which I think is good, although it's never going to be implemented because of very, very powerful landlords who don't recognize anybody, let alone women. But this is being done so that women who work within the economic zones will now be registered workers and they can be exploited to the hilt. So, but outside of those, and those export processing zones as yet do not exist where women will be working in the agriculture sector. This is all conjecture at this point. Women who work in the fields, what is their condition? For sugarcane, now Pakistan is slowly getting away from cotton and is producing a lot of sugar cane across the country. And the second one is now maize. Aslam Bhai comes from Sahiwal, and Sahiwal and Okada are big maize producing areas of Pakistan. And we see that cotton has been wiped out, and instead of that, we are now getting what we call dutta, makai, is being now sown. And that is because maize has value as ethanol, and so has sugarcane value as ethanol. Now, what happens to women's labor if you are working on sugarcane? They don't get paid for cutting sugarcane. They don't get paid for cutting the cane at all. What they get is when they clear the land of cane, they get the fodder. You know, all the green leaves which come out from the cane, the women can pick it up and take it away from them. Whatever amount they have cleared of the land, all the green stuff from that is now the women have the right to take that. And they do it for their livestock because they don't have land, they can't grow fodder, and fodder is so expensive. So what they end up doing is they do all this very hard work. And if you have ever cut cane, any of you, and have you worked through those cane fields, it is so hot and stifling, you know, and all those leaves and stuff is coming out and hits you. It scratches you all over this, all over your body, because they are really tall. They're much taller than the women themselves. So that is cane. Nothing. And for wheat, which is a very, very highly prized crop that women really like to do work on, what do they get? They get for 1 acre of land which they harvest, they would get, it differs slightly, but at the most 3.5 months to 4.5 months per acre, which is 3.1 mont is equal to 40 kg. And you know, on 1 acre of land, at least 6 to 8 people will work. It takes 2 days to clear 1 acre of land. So of the, let's say if it's 4 months of wheat which they get, that is being distributed amongst 8 people. And actually, if you take it to 2 days, it is being distributed amongst 16 people. So 1/6 of 4 months of wheat. And you know why they do that? Because it is food for them. It is food security for them. If they cut more and more wheat, that wheat which they get in kind, they don't get paid in cash, they get paid in kind. So that's somehow, if you do outright there, they take home and they save it and try to make it last for as many days as possible. Because when the wheat harvest goes away and the wheat you have to buy from the market, it starts becoming more and more expensive. These women do not have the money to buy wheat, and Pakistan is a flour eating country. We eat wheat, it's part of our staple. So I've just given you 2 examples. The zamindars, the feudal lords, we call them zamindars, are so harsh. Women will tell you that the small farmers will at least give you a glass of water, but the bigger landlords do not offer you water. Can you imagine, in the scorching heat of Pakistan, these women work on land and they have to carry their own water. They do not get food. They have to walk sometimes miles to get to the land where they are working. Sometimes they take a small boat and ferry across because we have rivers all over. And then they have to pay the guy who's ferrying them on the boat. So what do they get out of 12 hours of labor? They leave their kids behind. They carry their own food. They carry their own water. They have no transportation. So there is no occupational job security. There is no minimum wage. They're not even considered workers. Across Pakistan, except for Sindh, no other province recognizes women as agriculture workers, let alone farmers.
That is definitely quite a situation, Asla. Thank you so much for sharing. And as a follow-up question, um, do you do you think that there is a path towards the better treatment of women workers, particularly the recognition of their role as the ones who do the bulk of the work and who barely get paid, if at all? Is there a path towards more equity in that direction for women?
I mean, not in the present scenario. The path is through a different a path which is envisioned by the people themselves. Yes, of course. We believe there is a different path, and there is much more justice in the path that we will travel for sure. And that is the only way we can do that. is by fighting feudalism on its own, by fighting corporate agriculture on its own. We have to mobilize women themselves directly. And I will say, I say this with great, I'm not very happy saying this, but the biggest problem for us to get women mobilized is the patriarchy at home. It's a very patriarchal, also a fairly conservative, religious communities that we are dealing with. And the whole idea of women is, in Urdu, we call it chadar and chardiwari. Chadar is this thing, the veil that women wear. And it's not necessarily a veil like that, it's just a piece of cloth that you wear. And to say women's place is within the chadar and the chardiwari, which is her home. So it's okay, she can go work in the bloody fields, that's fine. But of course, she has to remember that her real place is her home. So when she comes back from work, she has to take, I forgot to say this, the entire burden of care work is on the women, of including to maintain their homestead, because it's made of mud. So they keep on putting mud on it. They make, I don't know what they call it, but they wet the mud, and then they slather it on top of their house. So how do we get out of this? I think, and that's why I find PKMT a wonderful movement to work with, because you have to tackle patriarchy with the men first. And I believe that women's autonomous organizations are critical, but it is also critical that women work directly with men as well. Because unless we do not allow progressive peasants, whether male or female, to prosper and to grow in numbers, how can we talk about women's liberation? How can we have women mobilizing? Then it will become a fight between the men and the women, and we do not believe in that. We believe very solidly in the solidarity of workers, men and women, across all diversities of gender, to work together as a unit, because the workers, whether they are peasants or workers, are one, and that is the solidarity we believe in letting it to flourish. And hence, yes, a better system is possible, but only if we fight on all three modes. Feudalism and capitalism are very critical, because they are the producing systems. That is where production happens. That is where the money and the wealth and the profits lie. And so our biggest challenge is to break the feudal control over land. That has to be the key number one fight that we engage in, is the struggle for land, and then struggle for land in as a collective for men and women. Because if we have progressive men on the front, then a collective piece of land will ensure equitable distribution of work. It will not mean that the land will now go to the man and the women will have to work all the time. We hope that there will be an even spread of labor and an even spread of the gains of labor.
That is a beautiful message. Thank you so much, Asra. And I would just like to touch once again on what you said about those three axes of oppression: neoliberalism slash capitalism, feudalism, and patriarchy. So I think the fact that you emphasize those three in particular, it really helps us to kind of zero in on what, on how we need to overcome the issues that are kind of inherent in the system that is already in there. And the you outlined it so well. I'm so grateful for having been able to hear you talk about it. And I would love to pass the mic on to Bobby now for our next question.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Chris. And Azraji also, because it is so alarming to see how corporate capture in agriculture and livestock sector across the border in Pakistan is also such an obstacle to progress. And same is here. And also the links of capitalism with gender injustices, for instance, or redistributive justice, how important it is. So, Amen Bauer, can we go back to you now? If you can help us understand, how can we push governments to stop corporate interference in agriculture and livestock sector, and hold abusive corporations to account on make polluters pay principle, for instance? Do you see the role of any international mechanism for holding these transnational corporations to account, or is it possible to do so within the national domestic legal and policy framework of Pakistan? Amen. Over to you.
I think it's very critical to understand how power is distributed within Pakistan to answer this question. And the thing is that we talk about feudalism, and so many feudal lords, of course, they have interests in the agriculture sector and all the related sectors of fodder and livestock. But they have also, because they had so much power and influence, they have also infiltrated uh, political leadership and political ranks, and they're also very influential in the judiciary. And now, with the rise of neoliberalism, many of these landlords, the landed elite, are also major corporate investors. So naturally, we see that there arises a conflict of interest, right? Because at the same time, farmers have no political representation, and the people making these policies will obviously make policies that further their agendas and increase their profits. So we see, when we examine the policies in the agriculture sector and the livestock sector, we see that the government, all the state departments are very complicit with corporations, and the policies that they then design as a result seek to benefit agribusinesses or foreign investors and local private investors, right? And so we see that if we focus on the dairy sector in particular, we see that there is one regulatory body called the Punjab Food Authority, and we regularly see that it carries out raids on milk supplies and wastes milk, saying that either the fat content is very low or that there is adulteration being carried out. And the PFA has a whole range of legal frameworks supporting these actions, and they've passed the pure food rules that call for standardization in processes and in all stages of food production. And the thing is that all of these procedures and policies also allow companies to get away with a lot. So companies that procure from small farmers, for instance, get away with paying, they check the milk for fat content, and they get away with paying less when the fat content of milk is low. And all of these policies, because they're based on a very industrialized understanding of food production, they do not also take into account natural processes, right? So any small farmer would tell you that there are lean seasons and flush seasons in which it's a natural process that in some seasons the fat content will be high and in some seasons will be low. But these policies don't really account for it, right? And even in the pasteurization policy I talked about, it's being done. When we examine all of these natural laws, we find that there's always a clause that says that this conforms to international standards under the Codex Agreement and the Codex Standards. So, and of course, this is through trade agreements such as SPS, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and other agreements that basically ask our regulatory bodies to design standards to conform to those. So, and in the end, we see that corporations they're basically capturing any and all sectors that they can get their hands on through, and they are enabled through government policies. So when we examine the fodder sector, for instance, we find that fodder production, the area under fodder production decreases every year. And this is just a ploy to get the fodder manufactured by transnational corporations into the market. And we see that yeah and we see that the government is increasingly making policies that do not favor local production methods. They do not favor indigenous livestock breeds. They are set to, the livestock development department, for instance, is set to bring semen from very high yielding animals from abroad, Dutch breeds and Australian breeds. And, we really see that it's all part of a bigger picture to give the livestock and dairy sector into the hands of these companies. And the only thing is that to pressurize governments to kind of dismantle all of these neoliberal agricultural laws that are increasing private investments. We recently saw that the biggest dairy company in Pakistan, Engro, was acquired by Friesen Campina of Netherlands. So, they're increasing private investments, foreign investments, and corporate control in the food and agriculture sector at the expense of small and landless farmers, because none of these technologies, none of these changes will be, a small farmer can't afford to buy buy a foreign breed of buffalo, or it can't afford the kind of milking systems that those animals require, the kind of infrastructure facilities they would need to be living in. And so we see that at the end, it's all at the expense of indigenous methods of food production, of natural ecologies, and of the way that small farmers have lived. And the only solution to push governments to stop corporate interference is, of course, as Dr. Azra also spoke about, is the mass mobilization of small and landless farmers and the establishment of very strong unions and associations, associations of milk sellers, of farmers, to basically act like pressure groups against all of these systems, and then demand an alternative system, a return to traditional agriculture, and working towards strengthening poison-free and chemical-free food production systems that are also obviously less harmful for the ecology. And as Dr. Azra also said that, the strongest deterrent to this is mobilizing women in Pakistan. It's such a daunting task because of the very real patriarchal norms. And so addressing and challenging these norms are the only way that we can create and sustain these movements for change. And also, when we talk about domestic policies and whether we need to change international policies or domestic policies, we realize that that our domestic policies actually conform to international frameworks, and so we cannot address one without addressing the other. In the end, we do need to reject WTO mechanisms and treaties that actually undermine state sovereignty and work to open markets for the benefit of corporations. And, in this case, renouncing codex standards, for instance, would be a very big step towards, giving the livestock sector back to the women. And because under codex standards, these production processes are so time consuming, so expensive that they can't be afforded by small producers, right? And so there need to be a lot of checks and balances on corporations to limit their power, because their operations are responsible for land and resource grabbing from indigenous people and small and landless farmers. We see that agricultural land has been grabbed by both state and corporations for all development projects. They are grabbing land for export-oriented agricultural production, export processing zones, and also for establishing very high-end housing societies. And this has led to the eviction of rural inhabitants and the destruction of indigenous knowledge and life both. And I think that there's already a growing realization that corporations and their economic interests are not harmless and apolitical. And corporations have been very complicit in some of the most gross human rights violations and rights abuses of our times, from, if we talk about the exploitative working conditions of sweatshops, or the manufacturing and dissemination of toxic pesticides that have actual real health risks and consequences for farming communities. So I think people are beginning to see that, and so we need to make consumers more politically aware, and so that they can actually create pressure to end this abuse. And in this day and age, social media is obviously a great tool to raise awareness and put pressure on governments. And a very good example would be that these days there's massive support for the Palestinian cause that is coming from social media, and people worldwide are participating in action that is carrying out strikes, etc. And they're actually finally rising up against decades of government and corporation involvement in funding Israel's military occupation and colonialism. And it's only now that they're calling for the boycott of all goods and services that is made by companies complicit in Israel's war crimes. So we can see that pushing governments to end the abuse of corporations can only be brought about by um, increasing and restoring people's power and creating very meaningful solidarity. Right?
Yes, thanks a lot, Amen. I totally agree with you. Like, we need to mobilize people and, to reclaim power, especially against these abusive corporations. And, while you were speaking, it reminded me of the Nestle boycott in late 1970s, where people realized it is their money which is going to the Nestle, and they lobbied and mobilized each other unitedly to boycott Nestle against the baby food, infant formula food, and which led to serious policy changes. And right now in India, like, so, the major farmers movement is going on against corporate interference and laws which are favoring corporations and not the farmers. So that's what the farmers say, and we believe in them. And let's hope that people before profits become a reality. Thanks a lot, Eamon, for that. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Eamon. And just before I ask the question for Muhammad Aslam, I would love to give Asra a moment to talk about the World Trade Organization very briefly, if it's okay.
Thanks, Christina. I think it's very critical to talk about a huge body called the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is responsible for the kind of latitude that corporations have been given across the border, across the world. And so when we talk about Codex Alimentarius, we should really talk about the WTO, because the WTO has given Codex Alimentarius the rights under the agreement which Eamon talked about, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. There are a whole range of agreements within the WTO, the agriculture, the GATS agreement, General Agreement on Trade and Services, the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. All of these very, very horrendous, brutal anti-farmer bills have been created by the WTO at the will of the United States, as we know, which is the number one monopoly capitalist in the world. And so we cannot talk about the corporations without talking about the illegal institution of the WTO, which has been created by the United States. Thank you.
In my reading about the dairy sector in Pakistan, there is a system of middlemen. A lot of people come between the dairy farmers themselves and the consumer. And this system helpful, or is it harmful? How do farmers feel about it? And what would that ideal system look like?
ठीक है, तो असलम भाई दो सवाल है आपसे. पहला तो ये कहनी है कि जो ہمارے یہاں گوالے ہوتے ہیں نا جو
جی جی
دودھ لے کے جاتے ہیں اور پورے ملک میں دودھ تو گوالے ڈسٹریبیوٹ کرتے ہیں، تو یہ
جی
کیا
جی
کسانوں کے مددگار ہیں یا کسانوں کے خلاف ہیں؟ یہ سسٹم آپ لوگوں کو اچھا لگتا ہے؟ دوسری بات یہ کہ آپ لوگوں کو، چھوٹے کسانوں کو جو دودھ کا کاروبار کرتے ہیں، آپ کے لیے سب سے اچھا نظام کیا ہوگا؟ کس نظام میں آپ لوگ ماشاءاللہ پھل پھول سکتے ہیں؟
شکریہ عذرا. دودھ جو ہے نا بیسیکلی جو پاکستان میں ہے، چھوٹا کسان جو ہے وہ کاشتکاری کے ساتھ ساتھ جانور بھی پالتے ہیں، اور اس کی جو دودھ ہوتا ہے نا، اس سے پہلے تو یہ ہے کہ انسان کی سب سے پہلی غذا ہے یہ، اور قدرت کا بہت بڑا تحفہ ہے، اور پہلے دن سے ہی بچہ دودھ پینا سٹارٹ کرتا ہے، اور اس کے بعد جو ہے جو ہم جو اس سے دودھ جانوروں سے حاصل کرتے ہیں، اس کے اوپر جو ہے نا کسی اور کا کنٹرول نہیں ہونا چاہیے. مکمل طور پہ اس کو جو ہے نا کسان کے ہاتھ میں ہونا چاہیے. اس میں دودھی جو ہے نا وہ کسان جو ہے اپنی معاش کا بھی ذریعہ ہے یہ چھوٹے کسانوں کا، اور اس کو دودھ کو جو ہے بھینسوں سے نکال کے اس کو مارکیٹ میں فروخت کرتے ہیں. لیکن اس کو مارکیٹ میں پہنچنے کے لیے کسان ڈائریکٹ جو ہے نا وہ مارکیٹ میں نہیں جا سکتا، وہ دور دراز علاقوں سے، اور پھر وہ جو ہے نا مڈل مین جو کہہ رہے ہیں آپ، بیچ میں دودھی آ جاتے ہیں جو اکٹھا کرتے ہیں، اکٹھا کر کے پھر جو ہے نا وہ مارکیٹ سے میں لے کے جاتے ہیں، اور پھر مارکیٹ میں آگے جو ہے انڈسٹریل لیول پہ جو بہت ساری کمپنیاں ہیں، وہ دودھ کے جو ہے نا انہوں نے ملک پوائنٹ جو ہے نا کلیکشن پوائنٹ بنائے ہوئے ہیں، اکٹھا کرتے ہیں ایک جگہ پہ، وہاں مختلف دودھی جاتے ہیں، جا کے ان کو دودھ دیتے ہیں. اور جو بات کرتے ہیں نا پیورٹی کی، خالص، اس میں ملاوٹ کی تو کوئی ایسا آدمی نہیں جو کہتا ہے کہ مجھے خالص چیز نہ ملے دنیا میں کہتا ہوں کوئی ایک آدمی بھی ایسا نہیں ہوگا. لیکن جو منافع کے لالچ میں وہ پھر جو ہے نا اپنے پیسے بڑھانے کے لیے مختلف طریقوں سے دودھ میں ملاوٹ بھی کرتے ہیں، اور ملاوٹ کے بعد اس میں کیمیکل بھی ڈالتے ہیں تاکہ اس کی مقدار بڑھائی جا سکے، اس کی فیٹ بڑھائی جا سکے، اور اس کے علاوہ جو ہے نا تاکہ اس سے زیادہ منافع استعمال کیا جائے. اور بات کرتے ہیں اس پہ جو ہے نا صحت کے، کہ یہ جو ہے نا کھلا دودھ مضر صحت ہے، لیکن میں تو یہ کہتا ہوں کہ صدیوں سے یہ لوگ دودھ کھلا ہی استعمال کر رہے ہیں. یہ پچھلے 2 دہائیوں میں جو کارپوریٹ سیکٹر جو ہے نا اس کی مداخلت ہوئی، انہوں نے دودھ جو ہے نا وہ اکٹھا کر کے اس کو خشک کرنا شروع کیا، یا ڈبوں میں پیک کر کے. دودھ کی قدرت نے ایک لائف رکھی ہے نا، اس کی جو تازہ دودھ ہے، قدرتی دودھ ہے، بھینس سے حاصل کرتے ہیں، اس کی 8-10 گھنٹے لائف ہے، 12 گھنٹے کہہ لیں، اب 24 آور کہہ لیں. اور اسی طرح وہ قدرت نے ایک نظام بنایا ہے، ہم صبح اور شام 2 وقت جانوروں کا دودھ نکالتے ہیں، یعنی صبح والا نکالتے ہیں، وہ شام تک ہماری ضروریات پوری کرتا ہے، اور شام کو پھر ہم تازہ نکالتے ہیں. اور ابھی جو ہے مسئلہ جو انڈسٹریل لوگ ہیں نا، سرمایہ دار، وہ یہ نہیں چاہتے کہ صحت میں ہیلپ کرنا چاہتے ہیں غریب لوگوں کی. ایکچوئل بات یہ ہے کہ وہ اس پہ دودھ سے منافع کمانا چاہتے ہیں تاکہ کسانوں کے ہاتھ سے دودھ چھین لیا جائے اور ان کے ہاتھ میں چلا جائے، اور اس سے ان کے منافع میں زیادہ سے زیادہ اضافہ ہو سکے. جیسے ہے ہمارے گاؤں میں، دیہاتوں میں دودھ جو ہے نا 50 سے 60 روپے ابھی فروخت ہوتا ہے، اور شہروں میں اس کی قیمت ہے 90 سے 100 110 روپے تک فروخت ہوتا ہے. اور جو دودھ پیدا کرتا ہے اس کو اتنے اخراجات کرنے کے بعد جو ہے نا وہ 60 روپے ملتے ہیں، اور جو دودھ ان سے لے کے مڈل مین جس کی بات کرتے ہیں آپ، جو لے کے جاتا ہے، اور وہ 40-50 روپے جو ہے نا وہ 1 kg کے وہ کماتا ہے اس پہ. اس میں اخراجات اس کے 20 روپے لگا لیں، جو وہ دیہاتوں سے اکٹھا کرتا ہے شہر تک، جو ابھی اس کی ٹرانسپورٹیشن ہے، اس کی دن کی محنت ہے، وہ 20 روپے کلو لگا لیں. 200 لیٹر دودھ کرتا ہے، اکٹھا کرتا ہے جو، تو وہ اس پہ 40-50 وہ 2000 کماتا ہے. اور جو بھینس پالتا ہے वो उसको जो है ना 500 का चारा खिलाता है तो 1000 उसको दूध का नहीं मिलता, यानी उसको 200-300 मिलता है। तो इस लिहाज से जो बेहतर सिस्टम तो है ना वो यही है कि इसमें जो है ना किसान की अपनी मर्जी चाहिए, इसकी फरोख्त अपने तरीके से करे। और जो अभी बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां बीच में आ गई हैं, नेस्ले है, गोरमे है।
असलम भाई एक सेकंड, आप क्या कह रहे हैं कि दूधियाले सही हैं, छोटे ये जो मिडिल मैन है सही है, या आपके लिए वो सिस्टम चल रहा है सही है?
नहीं नहीं, अगर देखे अगर डायरेक्ट अप्रोच जो है ना किसान की मार्केट तक हो तो वो ज्यादा बेहतर है।
ज्यादा बेहतर,
ये
ठीक है, मुझे
हाँ
इतना
इस
है ना, वरना मैं भूल
हाँ जी,
जाऊंगी। ठीक है,
अच्छा, हाँ
आगे
जी,
आप सही है। अच्छा जी,
अच्छा,
so what Chaudhry Aslam is saying is that he starts first from the question of milk coming from the animal. He says the livestock which gives milk is actually a gift to us, and we get it twice a day, and that is fresh milk. He says even when a child is born, in the very first day he wants milk. So it is something which is the basic food of human beings. Uh, and he very clearly says that milk has to and should be in the hands of the farmers themselves, the small farmers themselves. He prefers that. Right now, he says the farmers cannot go to the market, so the middlemen come and take the milk from the farmers. What they do is they take the milk at rupees 40 from the farmers, from the women actually, and when he goes, when the middleman goes and sells it in the market or to the corporations, he sells it to about rupees 60. And then what he does is he's the one who is putting all those chemicals or stuff which makes the quantity of milk grow, so that his own earning can grow. So there is where the problem is. But according to Chaudhry Aslam, the farmers have absolutely pure milk and there is no adulteration. And very rightly so, in Pakistan, Saiwal is hardly maybe 30 kilometers from a very old ancient site called Harappa, which is 5,000 years old, uh, prehistorical site. And Pakistan is full of prehistorical sites. We have, a history of more than 40,000 years of very old types of agriculture. But in the 5,000 years, we've had fairly good domestic agriculture. And he says if our people could have been drinking that milk for the past 5,000 years, why is today suddenly the corporations telling everybody that the milk that the farmers produce is bad for the health? And we in Pakistan now, many of these white coated pseudo doctors are coming on the TV and telling everybody that muzare sehat, which means it's bad for your health. All the doctors are coming on TV and are saying that milk, the fresh milk which the farmers are selling, is bad for your health. He says, how come that we have survived for 5,000 years and today suddenly it is bad for the health? It's actually the corporate control over fresh milk, over open milk, is what the companies are after, and we don't agree to that. He says, um, again, he emphasizes that it would be much better if the farmers had direct access to the markets and they could sell directly, because the middleman is getting some amount of profit, not exactly the huge profit actually is going to the corporations. The middlemen also make some profit, but it is at the middleman's level that milk adulteration happens. So I stopped him here. Um, and he says the least income that really is made by the women farmers or the small farmers, because they have the animal to look after, to feed the animal, to take care of the animal, to milk the animal, but they are only getting rupees 40 per liter, whereas the corporations are selling for more than 100 rupees per liter. So that's a lot of a big discrepancy between what the farmer is getting at the household level to what the corporations are selling it in the market. असलम भाई, अब आपने ये बताना है कि आपके लिए आइडियल सिस्टम क्या है, आप क्या समझते हैं कि क्या चीज बेहतर होनी चाहिए?
सिस्टम बेहतरी तो यही है कि जो है ना किसान औरतें जो दूध निकालते हैं, इनका कोई ऐसा सिस्टम होना चाहिए कि इनसे डायरेक्ट दूध जो है ना मार्केट तक जाए, ताकि इसका दूध का जो पूरा मुआवजा है ना, ये अगर इनमें बेहतरी इसी तरह आ सकती है कि इनको उसके दूध का पूरा मुआवजा मिले। تو جب مڈل مین بیچ میں آئے گا تو قطن بھی اس کو پورا معاوضہ نہیں ملے گا. اس کو بہتری لانے کے لیے یہی ہے کہ اس کا ڈائریکٹ اپروچ ہو, یا جیسے دیہات میں ہے ایک چھوٹی سی مارکیٹ ہو جس میں وہ دودھ اپنا فروخت کریں اور صحیح داموں پہ فروخت کریں. اور اگر وہ مڈل مین بیچ میں رہے گا تو وہ اس میں بہت سارے جو لوگ ہیں کچھ ایڈوانس کے چکر میں کم ریٹ پہ لیتے ہیں, ضروریات انسان کی ہیں, اور پھر جو ہے نا وہ اور زیادہ سستا لیتے ہیں. اور اسی طرح کمپنیاں بھی کرتی ہیں, یعنی دودھی کو جو لے کے جاتے ہیں اس میں پھر دودھی جو ہے نا فیٹس وغیرہ کے لیے ملاوٹ بھی کرتے ہیں. اور جو ابھی اسی کی آڑ میں جو وہ لفظ یوز کرتے ہیں نا, یہ جو ٹی وی پہ آتے ہیں لوگ کے کھلا دودھ جو ہے نا گندگی سے بھرپور. اور میں تو کہتا ہوں کہ ان کو اس بات کہنے پہ شرم آنی چاہیے کہ یہ گندگی کیسا لفظ استعمال کرتے ہیں دودھ کے لیے. تو ہم تو جو یہ اگر کوئی ایسی چیز ڈالتے ہیں تو یہ جو پرافٹ کمانے والے لوگ ہیں, اور گھروں میں تو الحمدللہ اتنا صاف دودھ جو ہے نا دھویا جاتا ہے بھینسوں کے, جو ہے نا وہ دودھ تھن جو ہے ان کو صاف کیا جاتا ہے, دھویا جاتا ہے, اس کے بعد بالٹی خشک ہوتی ہے, دھو کے اس کو جو ہے اس پہ دودھ نکالا جاتا ہے. اس میں تو کوئی اس قسم کی وہ چانس ہی نہیں ہے. اور پھر جو ہے اس کی زندگی ہے 10-12 گھنٹے دودھ کی, اس میں تو کوئی چانس ہی نہیں کہ اس میں گندگی شامل ہو جائے. اور میں نے تو یہ شاید پہلے بھی ہماری 1-2 دفعہ بات ہوئی تھی, تو میں نے اسی میٹنگ میں یہ چیلنج کیا تھا کہ مجھے آپ 8-10 مختلف قسم کے جو ہے نا جینڈر کے مختلف ایجز کے لوگ دے دیں جو ٹی وی پہ بیٹھ کے کہتے ہیں کہ کھلا دودھ جو ہے مضر صحت ہے. وہ میں ان کو جو ہے نا وہ 2-4 سال کے لیے مجھے دے دیں, 2-4 سال کے لیے وہ بھی سنبھال لیں, اور پھر ان کی جو دیکھ لیں کہ اس میں وہ صحت کس کی بہتر ہے, ان کے ٹیسٹ کروا کے دے دیں. تو اور ایک یہ بات ہے, ایک دوسری بات ہے کہ سب سے بڑا ہے کہ جو عالمی اداروں کی مداخلت ہے, جیسے وہ WTO ہے یا دوسرے عالمی ادارے ہیں جو ہمارے سسٹم میں جو پالیسی جو ہے ہمارے ملک میں ہماری گورنمنٹ کو وہ دیتی ہے, وہ اپنی مرضی کے تحت جس میں ان کے مفاد ہوتے ہیں وہ دیتے ہیں. اس میں جو ہے نا کسان کو جب بھی کوئی پالیسی بنائی جاتی ہے چھوٹے کسان کی تو آواز سنی نہیں جاتی, اس میں اس کی شمولیت ہی نہیں ہوتی. یا تو جاگیردار ہوتے ہیں اس میں یا سرمایہ دار ہوتے ہیں. ہماری تو جو چھوٹے کسانوں کی ہے وہاں تک اپروچ ہی نہیں ہے. اور پھر اس کے علاوہ جو ہے نا میڈیا, اسپیشلی ایڈورٹائزمنٹ کا سسٹم, یہ سارا ان کے ہاتھ میں. ہمارے پاس تو اتنے وسائل ہی نہیں ہے کہ ہم اپنی چیز کو جو ہے نا وہ اس کو وہ ٹی وی پہ یا اس پہ نشر کر سکے کہ یہ ہماری چیز ہے, یہ استعمال کریں. اسی طرح جو ہے نا بہت ساری جو ہے ہماری دیسی چیزیں ہمارے ہاتھوں سے, جیسے KFC وغیرہ بن گئے, ہماری دیسی خوراکیں تو انہوں نے چھین لی. اور جو ہماری نیشن جو ہے وہ بھی جو چاہتی ہے کہ ڈبے سے دودھ لے کے پی لیں. اور جو ہمارے میں ڈاکٹروں سے بھی یہ اپیل کروں گا, جیسے جو ہے پہلی بچہ جو ہی پیدا ہوتا ہے تو وہ پہلی بات جو لکھتے ہیں وہ فیڈر لکھتے ہیں ان کے لیے, اور وہ پاؤڈر والا دودھ جو میرا خیال ہے وہ 1 پاؤ کا یا آدھے کلو کا پاؤڈر کا ڈبہ جو ہے اس کی قیمت 3200 روپے ہے. اور جو وہ چھوٹے غریب لوگوں کے تو بس کی بات نہیں ہے. اور
باتیں بول رہے ہیں, مجھے انگریزی کرنے دیں ورنہ میں بھول جاؤں گی نا.
چلو ٹھیک ہے, کر لیں آپ.
I've just asked him to stop because he's saying very good things and I'm afraid I'm going to forget. So he starts with that women farmers are the ones who are real caregivers for livestock. And the best is that the women themselves should have direct access to the market. And if they can't have big markets very far away from the villages, let us have small markets so that women can actually go and sell their extremely healthy and very, very clean product directly to the consumers, and everybody gains from that. They have a very good price for their produce and everybody gets a very good fresh produce. He says, when these white coat men and people on the media say that our milk is dirty, gandagi, the word is gandagi, he says they should be ashamed of themselves because there is nothing more pure than milk, because milk cannot sustain any kind of contamination, it goes bad immediately. So how dare they use that word for our milk? The problem with contamination of milk is at the hands of profit-seeking entities, whether it be small farm, whether it be the middlemen or the corporations. They are responsible for making the milk so bad. He says, I challenge you, and he has said that on many occasions to us. He said, I challenge you, You give me 10 people and you take 10 people, the corporations, and I will look after those 10 people for 2 years, and you look after those 10 people for 2 years, and come and check on health basis whose health is better, the people we look after or you look after. He says there is no way that anybody who's fed on the milk we produce and the kind of food we produce can decrease your health. It can only improve it. And then he also talks about the control. He says the problem of control is with the World WTO. He talks about the WTO, and then he also talks about other institutions. He didn't name them, but of course, as IMF and World Bank, PKMT is very aware of these lectures who are sitting in these Western world and trying to come and take away our control over resources. And so he's saying it is those corporations who are responsible for creating systems which are responsible for creating this kind of an atmosphere around milk. And then he says the control inside a country is with the corporate sector and with the landlords, the feudal landlords. Hence, we do not have the right to decision making. The small farmers have no right to decision making. We have no way to reach those areas where policy making is happening. And then he says, what about media? We don't have media control. We cannot go and do the similar kind of advertisements which they are doing. And he gives us the example of dry milk. He says, one container of dry milk is 32 rupees, 3200 rupees, 3200 rupees, which he says no small farmer can buy that for his children. How can we buy milk for 3200 rupees? And what does the medical care system do to us? Like just now, Bobby was talking about Nestle, that as soon as the child is born, these medical people are telling the mothers that you should buy a feeder for your child. And that is the problem. These, the way they have taken away our traditional systems of taking care of ourselves. We had so many different forms of traditional food that we used to have. Now the burger walas and the KFCs and all of them have come in, and they are trying to encroach onto our safe health systems. So this is what he said. I'll see if he has anything more to say. ये असलम भाई आपने जमीन की कोई बात नहीं की.
आपने एक्चुअल बात जो है ना अभी पहले स्टार्ट ही डेयरी से की थी, और मैं एक बात आपसे कहना चाहता था कि जो है ना ये डॉक्टर साहबान जो बात करते हैं, हमारे बड़े तो ये जो कहते थे कि जो बच्चा माँ का दूध पिएगा ना और वो 40 साल तक उसमें माँ के दूध के असर रहता है, उसमें जो है ना कोई बीमारी नहीं आती. अभी भी हम देख लें, जो बच्चा माँ का दूध पीता है उसमें कोई बीमारियां नहीं आएंगी. जो फीडर से दूध पिएगा उसके पिचस, पेट में दर्द, दूध का बाहर निकालना, ऐसी चीजें उसमें होती हैं. अभी मैं बात आ जाता हूँ दूसरे पे, पायदार ज़राअत की तरफ. एक्चुअल जो है ना अभी जैसे हुआ मौजूदा भी जो अभी गंदम के रेट्स की बात है कि जी ये छोटे किसान के लिए हमारी गवर्नमेंट कहती है कि हमने बहुत कुछ किया है, इसका रेट 400 रुपया बढ़ा दिया गया है, लेकिन एक्चुअल इसका फायदा जो है ना छोटे किसान को नहीं हुआ. छोटे किसान जिसके पास 1 एकड़ जमीन है उसकी तो घर की जरूरत मुश्किल से पूरी होती है, वो उससे क्या कमाएगा. जो बड़ा लैंडलॉर्ड है जिसके पास 100 एकड़ है, 200 एकड़ है, 500 एकड़ है, 1000 एकड़ है, एक्चुअल तो फायदा उनको पहुंचा है. और गंदम जो है ना बेसिकली हर इंसान खाता है, हर एक की जरूरत है. और जो खरीदने वाले जो जिनके पास लैंडलेस लोग हैं उन्होंने भी गंदम खानी है, वो खरीदेंगे. 1800 में गवर्नमेंट ले रही है, वो 2000 में उनको मिलेगी, 1800 में मिलेगी. और जो बेचने वाले वो कम है, लेने वाले ज्यादा हैं. जो मजदूर तबका है वो सारा खरीद के गंदम खाता है. उनकी जरूरत, इसकी कीमत कम करनी चाहिए थी एक्चुअल. अगर फायदा देना था ना गरीब लोगों को तो इसकी कीमत में कमी लानी चाहिए थी. ये तो एक्चुअल जो है ना काम जो भी होता है, जो भी पॉलिसी बनती है वो छोटे किसान या मजदूर के नाम पे बनती है, लेकिन उसका नाम लेकर फायदा जो है वो सरमायादार उठाता है. नाम इस्तेमाल होता है छोटे किसान का और फायदा ज्यादा से ज्यादा और लैंडलॉर्ड या फिर जो सरमायादार अंडर जो सनतकार, इससे तमाम फायद जो है ना वो हासिल करते हैं. जैसे हम बात करते हैं पायदार ज़राअत की, सेहत की, हर मामले में हम सेहत को जो है ना वो आगे रखते हैं कि सेहत सबसे जरूरी है, और खुराक भी सबसे जरूरी है. لیکن جو ہماری خوراک کے ساتھ ابھی جو حشر ہو رہا ہے، جیسے ابھی چینی کا بحران، آٹے کا بحران. چینی کیا ہمارے ملک میں چینی نہیں ہے، لیکن جو ہے نا جو مافیا بیٹھے ہیں، جو صنعت کار بیٹھے ہیں، ان کے گوداموں میں چینی وہ چھپائے بیٹھے ہیں. وہ نہر میں پھینکنا تو پسند کرتے ہیں کہ یہ چینی جو میرے پاس جو ہے نا 10,000 20,000 بیگ پڑا ہے، میں وہ جو ہے نا حکومت حاصل کرنے کے لیے، اپنا پیسہ بڑھانے کے لیے اس طرح کے کام کرتے ہیں. یا حکومت جو چل رہی ہے، موجودہ حکومت ہے، اس کو فیل کرنے کے لیے اس طرح کے کام جو ہے نا وہ مخالف لوگ کرتے ہیں ایک دوسرے کے. وہ اس عمران خان حکومت میں بھی بیٹھے ہیں، نواز شریف حکومت میں بھی بیٹھے ہیں. ابھی جو نواز شریف ہے وہ چاہتا ہے وہ کسی طرح اقتدار میں آئے، وہ کس طرح اس کو ناکام کرے گا تو پھر ہی آئے گا، ادروائز نہیں آ سکتا. تو وہ جو ہے نا لوگ وہ جو چینی گندم اس کا سٹاک کر کے ذخیرہ کر کے چور دروازے سے یہ چیزیں جو ہے نا ان کو کنٹرول کرنا. اور اس میں جو صحت کی بات کرتے ہیں تو خالص غذا جو اس میں پیسٹی سائڈ کتنا استعمال ہوتا ہے، اس کی کتنی وہ ایڈورٹائزمنٹ آتی ہے، تو کوئی دیسی کی طرف تو نہیں آتا، ان کو کوئی بتاتا ہی نہیں ہے. وہ صرف پیداوار بڑھانے کی بات کرتے ہیں. وہ لالچ دیتے ہیں کسانوں کو، چھوٹے کسانوں کو، کہ آپ یہ چیزیں استعمال کریں، آپ کی فی ایکڑ 5 من بڑھ جائے گی، اس کے بعد یہ استعمال کریں 5 من اور بڑھ جائے گی. اور اس قسم کا لالچ دے کے وہ جو ہے نا اس کو، اور کسان جو ہے وہ سادہ لو کسان ان کی باتوں میں آ کر آگے جو ہے نا وہ اس پہ کرتے ہیں، لیکن ان کو بجائے فائدے کی نقصان ہوتا ہے. اس کی جو ہے نا اس کی قیمت زیادہ، فصلوں کی اس پہ لاگت خرچہ زیادہ آتا ہے اور اس سے حاصل کم ہوتا ہے. ابھی ایک جو ہے نا ہم اگر دیسی طریقے سے اگائیں، اس میں روڑی وغیرہ گوبری کھادیں استعمال کریں، تو 1 ایکڑ میں ہم جو ہے اگر اس پہ خرچہ کریں گے 5,000 تو اس سے ہم جو ہے نا 30-35 ہزار حاصل کر سکتے ہیں. لیکن اگر ہم اس کو خرچہ کریں اس میں 35 سے 40 یا 50 ہزار، تو اس میں سے ہم 60 ہزار کریں تو وہ تو کم ہو گیا. لیکن یہ جو ہمارے جو پالیسی میکرز ہیں نا وہ اسی طرح، یا جو قبضہ پیسٹی سائیڈ وغیرہ جو کارپوریٹ سیکٹر ہے ان کا قبضہ ہے. جیسے بیج میں کہہ لیں، بیج ہمارے ہی بیج ہے نا، کسی کمپنی نے اگر کوئی بیج بنایا تو مجھے بتا دے کہ یہ فلاں کمپنی نے کوئی نئی چیز، جو ہماری جو ہے نا یہ سالوں سے گندم چل رہی ہے، سالوں سے مکی چل رہی ہے، اور اس کو اگر کوئی انہوں نے مکی کی نئی شکل بنا رہی ہے تو مجھے بتا دیں. کوئی نہیں ہے، کسی نے نہیں بنائی. اسی میں جو ہے نا وہ ادھر کر لیا، ادھر کر لیا، کراس کرا لیا، اور کیا جی یہ فلاں بیج بن گیا، فلاں بیج بن گیا. اسی میں جو ہے نا ان کسان کو الجھا کر وہ اپنا منافع، اس کی قیمت کیا ہے جی، یہ ہائیبرڈ آ گیا ہے، یہ 10,000 کا بیگ ہے، اور یہ جو ہے یہ دیسی تھا، اور اس کی جو ہے آپ کو جو ہے نا ملے گا ایکڑ سے 100 من، آپ جو حاصل کرتے تھے 20 من، اور ابھی آپ حاصل کریں گے 100 من. لیکن اس کی بیسک کاسٹ تو دیکھیں 10 kg جو ہے 15,000 روپیہ قیمت ہے 10 kg مکی کے بیج کا. ابھی جیسے جو ہے نا
اسلم بھائی رک
حالانکہ دال،
جائیں، آپ بولو گے تو میں کب سے واپس باقی کو سمجھ تو آئے.
اچھا
Okay, I have to stop him. I wish everybody could understand what he's saying. He's saying such wonderful things, and I'm not doing justice to the entire uh, translation. So what I have to say is, he says, I forgot to say this in the earlier thing, that children who drink mother's milk do not fall sick at all. They do not have any kind of problems. They do not have diarrhea. They do not have so many diseases. And so the mother's milk is natural, and that's why there is a inbuilt immunity into that system. We all know that. He says, we have known this for ages. This is every rural family knows that, and that is what they practice. But now he's relating all of this now to sustainable agriculture, to agroecology, how agroecology was practiced in the olden days and how it is not being done anymore. He says that um, all policies that are now made for farmers are actually in the interest of the corporate sector or for the big landlords or the industrialists. And he's giving examples of the support price that was given by the government in the recent months. They have increased the support price for wheat. He says that's not beneficial to the small farmers because the small farmers have 1 or 2 acres of land. They don't sell their wheat at all. what they do is that uh, they actually keep all the wheat for personal consumption. It is the big farmers who have 100 acres of land, 200 acres of land, when they get the support price, when they get to sell per mound of wheat at a very higher rate, it is they who will take the profits, not the small farmer. It would have been much better if they would have decreased the price of wheat for the farmer so that his ability to buy wheat at a lower cost would have been there. He says there are many more landless farmers in the country than those who have land. And so millions of landless farmers would have benefited if the cost of wheat would have gone down. But right now, everything is in the all policies are set to help the Sarmayadar or the Sanatkar, which is the industrialist, or the Jagirdar, which is the landlord. And then he makes a very important point. He says, this is nothing but a tussle between political parties, because every political party tries to benefit their own ring of, their cronies. Whereas, so each government which comes in, for instance, the PTI government is in rule right now, they are doing their best to help their own cronies. And the opposition parties are trying to pull them down. So where is the farmer in all this? The farmer is actually not part of the policy making. This is either about themselves or it is about their benefits to the corporate sector. And so that is very, very important. And he says, what is this nonsense about fresh, that the packaged milk is better than fresh milk? If they were so worried about people's health, why don't they stop pesticides? Every day there are so many advertisements on TV on pesticides, and we all know that pesticides are very, very harmful. But those advertisements don't stop. And the problem is that the small farmers, the landless farmers, look at the mainstream media and think they must be correct. And that's why all this is coming. And so they increase the use of pesticides or urea. And that is really, really harmful to the farmers. But he says that is how the mainstream has got hold of the landless and the small farmers. And there we spent so much money in buying the seeds, in buying the urea, and buying the fertilizers, and we lose a lot of money. If we had gone back to agroecology, we would have spent less, maybe we would have produced less, but we would have saved more. So, in essence, this is what he has said just now.
Thank you so much. Those are such wonderful, wonderful, meaty things to chew on, especially what Aslan said about the traditional systems of care, both interpersonal and ecological systems of care that are already existing, that have existed for over 5,000 years since Harappa. So that is enormous. And to return to traditional systems that have direct relationships with yes, sorry.
Christina, he said one more thing. When you said Harappa, I remembered. He said,
Oh
to
yes.
this day, they have never given us anything original. The seeds are ours. Everything is ours. They have only tried to manipulate the seed and come up with hybrid seeds or nonsense seeds. But have they ever given us anything which we have not given them before, or nature has not given them before? So thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for translating so eloquently, Dr. Asra. Because it's just the fact of the matter is what Mr. Aslam is saying is, so it lies at the very heart of what we want to do, which is to return to this relationship between people, to return to a way of being that is healthy for everybody, and to break away from basically the shackles and the alienation of corporate control. And that is pretty much that you summed it up very well, Aslam. And I'm so grateful. And it seems that the ones who are the most in power have the most access to the ways that the system can be gamed, so to speak, so that it very much favors them. But at the same time, people are still working so hard to continue on their traditional systems of care, to continue caring for one another in their communities and caring for their environment. And I think that that spirit should continue. And in line with that, I'd love to ask if Bobby has another question.
Can I just first translate it for him so that he knows what you said, Christina?
Sure, sure.
اسلم بھائی آپ کا بہت بہت شکریہ ادا کر رہی ہیں کہ بہت اچھی باتیں آپ نے بولی ہیں اور بہت ایسی باتیں بولی ہیں کہتی ہیں ہمیں ساری باتیں یاد کر کے ہضم کرنے میں تھوڑا سا ٹائم لگے گا، اتنی آپ نے زبردست باتیں کی ہیں. اور پھر کہہ رہی ہیں کہ کتنا آپ ہمارے لوگ کتنی محنت کرتے ہیں کہ اپنی کمیونٹیز کو سنبھال سکیں، ان کو کیئر دے سکیں، ان کے لیے خیال کر سکیں اور سب کو اپنی روایتی چیزوں سے فائدہ دے سکیں، لیکن سسٹم ہمارے خلاف اتنا زیادہ کام کرتا ہے. تو بہت بہت آپ کا شکریہ ادا کریں.
آپ سب لوگوں کا بھی میں بھی شکریہ ادا کرتا ہوں. بہت ساری چیزیں آپ سے بھی ملی، لیکن جو ہے نا مجھ سے اگر کچھ ملا آپ سے بھی مجھے بہت کچھ ملا ہے. کچھ باتیں آپ سے بھی سیکھی میں نے. اور وہ لینگویج کا تو خیر مسئلہ ہے، تھوڑی بہت سمجھ آتی تھی مجھے کرسٹینا کی اور بوبی کی بھی، تو ایمن کی کچھ زیادہ سمجھ آ رہی تھی. اور کیونکہ وہ اس کا لینگویج سٹائل تھوڑا سا وہ دوسرا ہے، ان کا دوسرا ہے. اور آپ کی بھی کچھ باتیں سمجھ آ رہی تھی وہ جب آپ انگریزی میں بات کر رہی تھی. برکف جو ہے نا آپ سب لوگوں کا میں بھی شکریہ ادا کرتا ہوں. تو آپ بہت اچھے لگی اور یہ بڑا اچھا میٹنگ ہماری ہوئی. بہت شکریہ.
Thank you very much everybody. And he says I could understand Azra and Iman a bit more because your accents were like ours and it was harder for us to understand Bobby. But he followed a little bit of our conversation. And he's saying thank you very much. But go ahead if you have anything.
Yeah. Thank you so much. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया चौधरी असलम साहब and Azra ji also for this such a powerful translation and such a powerful messages, and these resonate very strongly with where I am and what I see around me also. So the issues surely connect, deeply connect people across borders, across regions. So Azra ji, I just wanted to ask Chaudhry Aslam Sahab, as the inequity is so deeply worrying, and the inequity has come in not only with what he shared, but also with what you shared, what Eamon shared. So can you please ask Chaudhry Aslam Sahab, how can we ensure progress on redistributive justice so that there is equitable distribution of resources and land to the tiller principle, on the land to the tiller principle, and also in context of the livestock sector he has been referring to. So that will be great and a positive note to end the session.
Bobby, I think we already explained the livestock sector, so maybe I'll just ask him the first one.
Yes,
right?
Please. Okay, thank you.
اچھا اسلم بھائی، آپ کے لیے ایک اور سوال ہے. تو ہے کہ جو آپ لوگوں نے باتیں کی ہیں اس سے جو لوگوں کے ساتھ ظلم ہو رہا ہے وہ تو آپ لوگوں نے بہت صفائی سے بتایا ہے نا. اب اگر آپ بیان کر سکیں کہ ہمارا ایک ہے نا جو بووے وہی کھاوے، پنجابی میں بھی آپ لوگ اکثر بولتے ہیں، میں شاید غلط بول رہی ہوں، تو ہم اس کو کیسے حاصل کر سکتے ہیں کہ اس کو انگریزی میں لوگ کہتے ہیں ری ڈسٹریبیوٹیو جسٹس، یعنی کہ ہمارے جو وسائل ہیں ان کو ہم دوبارہ سے ایسے بانٹیں کہ انصاف مل جائے. تو یہ سسٹم کیسے ہو سکتا ہے نا؟
یہ میڈم بات یہ ہے کہ اس پہ جو ہمارے وہ PKMT کا منشور بھی ہے کہ لینڈ ریفارم کی بات کرتے ہیں جب ہم، تو جو ہے نا اس میں سب سے پہلی بات ہے کہ سوشل جسٹس، جو معاشرتی انصاف ہے نا، تمام لوگوں کے ساتھ جو ہے نا ان کو برابری کے حقوق دیے جائیں. زمین کے ایک کے پاس بہت زیادہ ہے ان سے، جیسے جو ہے نا ابھی سائی واگ میں تو بہت سارے جو ہے آپ کے شاید علم میں بھی ہے سرکاری زمینیں بہت ساری ہیں، اور اس میں سے اگر جو ہے نا وہ لوگوں میں اگر کوئی اس طرح کا گورنمنٹ ہماری اگر چاہتی ہے ان کو، تو لوگوں میں وہ ڈسٹریبیوٹ کی جائے، یا جو بہت بڑے لینڈ لارڈ ہیں ان سے جو ہے نا زمینیں جو ہے نا وہ جو لینڈ لیس لوگ ہیں ان میں دی جائیں. ایک تو یہ طریقہ ہو سکتا ہے. دوسرا یہ ہے کہ ان کو ان کی مزدوری ہی جو وہ کام کرتے ہیں، دن بھر جو محنت کرتے ہیں، تو اس سے بھی ان کو کچھ فائدہ ہو سکتا ہے. کیونکہ ان کو تو جو بڑے ہیں نا وہ صرف اپنے منافع کی طرف دیکھتے ہیں، غریب کی یا کمزور کی، مزدور کی، کسان کی محنت کی طرف نہیں دیکھتے کہ یہ ہمارے لیے سارا دن، جیسے سندھ میں سسٹم ہے ہمارے ہاری کا، وہ سارا دن ہاری کام کرتا ہے اور شام کو جو ہے ساری اٹھا کے وہ وڈیرا لے جاتا ہے. اور پنجاب میں خیر وہ اتنا سخت سسٹم نہیں ہے پنجاب میں بھی جو وہ کام کرتے ہیں ہاری یا زمینوں پہ منشی وغیرہ سارے وہ جو ہے نا کام سارا دن بھر محنت کرتا ہے کسان, اور شام کو جو ہوتا ہے وہ اٹھا کے, لیکن اس کے لیے وہ جو ہے نا معاشرتی انصاف جو اس نے کام کیا میں کما کے آپ کو دیتا ہوں, جیسے یہ آجر اور اجیر جیسے یہ انڈسٹری کو آپ کہہ لیں کہ سارا دن بھر مزدور کام کرتا ہے, مزدور کما کے دیتا ہے, اور مزدور کا حصہ اور جو فیکٹری مالک کا حصہ اس میں بہت بڑا فرق ہے. اور وہ جو ہے جو 500 آدمی مزدور فیکٹری میں کام کرتا ہے ان کو جو ہے نا وہ شام میں 5,000 نہیں ملتا, لیکن جو ہے فیکٹری کا مالک وہ شام میں لاکھ روپیہ اٹھا کے جاتا ہے. اور اس میں جو ہے نا جو اس کی تقسیم ہے اس میں کوئی اس طرح کا ہمیں کرنا چاہیے. اس کے لیے جو ہے ہمیں اپنے حقوق کے لیے متحد بھی ہونا چاہیے, اور پالیسی بھی جو ہے اس کی اس طرح بننی چاہیے کہ تاکہ ان کو اجرت پوری ملے جو لوگ کام کرتے ہیں, مزدوری پہ کرتے ہیں, کھیتوں میں کرتے ہیں, اور جو کھیتوں میں جو چیزیں ہماری پیدا ہوتی ہیں اس کا جو ہے نا وہ فائدہ زیادہ سے زیادہ کسان کو ملے, اس میں ان کا منافع کا جو ہے نا وہ پورا جو ہے نا بہت زیادہ مارجن نہ ہو جو فیکٹری کا ہے یا انڈسٹری کا ہے.
PKMT
جی
تو کرنا منصفانہ تقسیم,
ہاں جی
منصفانہ تقسیم پہ نہیں بات کرنی.
جی
آپ
منصفانہ وہی ہے نا جو وہ معاشرتی انصاف یہی ہے نا, تاکہ زمین کے حقوق سب کو برابر دیے جائیں, سب لوگوں کے پاس زمین ہونی چاہیے, اور تبھی یہ ممکن ہو سکتا ہے جب سب لوگوں کے پاس زمین ہوگی. آپ کے پاس جو ہے نا 1,000 ایکڑ ہے اور میرے پاس 1 ایکڑ ہے, تو کیسے پھر ہو سکتا ہے؟ یعنی ضرورت تو آپ کی بھی 2 وقت کی روٹی ہے اور میری بھی 2 وقت کی روٹی ہے, اور اس کو جو ہے نا ہر انسان جو ہے نا 2 ہی روٹیاں کھاتا ہے دن میں. جس کے پاس کروڑوں ہیں, اربوں ہیں, نوٹوں پہ سوتا ہے, اسی میں بیٹھتا ہے, سب ضرورت ہے اس کی بھی 2 روٹیاں ہیں اور میری بھی 2 روٹیاں ہیں, لیکن مجھ سے وہ دو روٹیاں بھی چھیننے کی کوشش کی جا رہی ہے کہ اس کو یہ جو 2 روٹی کھاتا ہے نا صبح و شام, یہ اس سے کس طریقے سے چھینی. کام اس طرح کا جو ہمارے انٹرنیشنل نیشنل ادارے ہیں نا وہ سارے اسی پہ کام کر رہے ہیں کہ غریب سے کیسے چھیننا ہے, اس سے اپنا منافع کیسے بڑھانا ہے, اور اس کو کیسے, تاکہ اس کو اپنا غلام کیسے رکھنا ہے, تاکہ یہ آزادی کے متعلق سوچ ہی نہ سکے, تاکہ اس کا ادھر یہ اپنی روزی روٹی میں پریشان رہے تو ہمارے خلاف بات ہی نہ کر سکے. اس طرح کی باتیں, تو اس پہ ابھی دیکھیں آپ ٹرانسلیٹ کرنا چاہتے ہیں.
So I will say what he said in the very end. He said that the international institutions really actually believe in slavery. They want to maintain a system of slavery, and that is the problem. And the very rich people also have the same context. He says whether you are very poor or you are very rich, in the end you only have you will eat 2 pieces of bread. That is what the human intake is. But the rich, the powerful, want to take away even those 2 slices of roti. We call it, chapatis are different from bread. He says they are trying to take away even those 2 pieces of bread from us that we are barely able to manage. And he, although he cannot eat more than 2, he still doesn't want us to eat the 2, which is our right. So that is the system. He says we have to break it, and he calls it social distribution. And he says it's all about taqseem. Taqseem means distribution in English. He says if you have 1,000 acres and I have 1 acre, then the division has to be based on equity. Everybody has to have the same amount of land. Only then will we have equity and justice. He also talks about wages. He says, of course, land distribution is what is needed the most. But at the same time, if we even talk about what people are earning, the wages, then the people in the factories may be working the whole day, but do they even get 5,000? They don't. But the people who own the factories may be taking 100,000 at the end of the day home. And that, if that is going to happen, there's going to be no justice. So that is what we need to change. We need to change, number 1, the wage system and the land distribution system. And we need to create a system where There is also unity amongst the farmers, amongst the workers. So there is a united demand for our demands which are based on justice. But for that, we really need a unity among ourselves as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Siraji, and thank you so much, Audrey Saab also. So I think we are kind of running short of time here in this session. So let us hear the closing remarks from each of our speakers. So maybe we can begin with you, Asraji, since you already have the mic.
Okay, just give me a second also to tell Chaudhry Saab that you think
Thank
what
you. Thank you.
critical things he needs to think through. असलम भाई पहले मैं बोलूंगी फिर शायद एमन बोलेगी फिर आपकी बारी होगी ना तो आपने बस शॉर्ट एक दो बातें बोलनी है जो सबसे ज्यादा अहम है जो आपके नज़र में पीकेएमटी के मेंबर होने की नज़र में सबसे अहम बात आपने क्या कहनी है अभी लेकिन पहले मैं बोलूंगी फिर एमन बोलेगी ठीक है आप जब तक सोच लो in response to your question, Bobby, on closing remarks, I think it's very clear that we are living in a system of extreme exploitation and oppression. And the system now has gone towards imperialism. It's no more about a fresh growth of capitalism where maybe there is some benefit coming out of it. No, it has gone beyond any semblance of where the workers, the peasants, the women are getting anything out of the system. They're not. And they're trying to change the balance even to further oppression. So for me, the closing is that we need to fight this. We need to unite across all sectors of the working class, especially the peasants and the workers, and to create a very huge mobilization where the control over resources and food sovereignty, especially for the milk sector, for the farmers, is in the hands. The decision making and control over resources is in the hands of the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asraji. Can we have the final comments from Eamon Babar, please? Eamon?
So I think for me, the most important thing to close with would be that all of these corporations and the government are designing policies on the pretext that they care about the people and they're doing it for their benefit, their economic benefit, their health benefit. When clearly, when we look at the situation on ground, that's not the case. And, whenever we are talking about what is happening in the milk sector and how they keep on saying that the milk the milk produced by small farmers is contaminated, we always retort back by saying that, in a country where most of the infections are waterborne, where children are dying from waterborne diseases and all the infections, all the diseases are spreading from contamination of water, why is the government, why are these private players not working to eliminate that? Because in any case, water consumption of people is still higher than the milk consumption. They're not targeting that. All they're looking for is to control the milk sector for their own profit and not for the health of the people. So that's the number one thing that we always retort back with, right? And as Dr. Azran Chaudhry Sahab also said that these systems that are emerging as a result of corporate hegemony are systems based on greed, and the greed is endless, right? And we see that in every form. And so, for instance, the greed in the milk sector is so intense that we see that with company operated cattle farms, the calves are not even allowed to feed on their mother's milk, and an alternative injection of oxytocin is given to the cows, the buffaloes, to stimulate them for higher yields of milk. So, imagine the greed of these corporations, that they're resorting to these mechanisms just to increase their own production of milk and to increase their profits. So everything they do is basically premised on limitless greed and just the desire to take away all of these factors of production from the people and lay control over them.
Thank you so much, Eamon, for these important comments. And Chaudhry Aslam Sahab, now we will hear your final comments, please. Chaudhry Aslam Sahab. हाँ बताएं जी सर।
थैंक यू। अच्छा, जो सबसे पहले बात कहूंगा कि जो हमारी चीज है ना, जैसे हम दूध की बात करते हैं, जो चीज किसान से ली जाती है ना, जिस हालत में ली जाती है, आगे मार्केट में वो इसी हालत में पहुंचे तो इससे भी बहुत फायदा हो सकता है, ताकि वो उसकी वो हालत ना तब्दील की जाए, उसमें कोई मिलावट वगैरह ना की जाए, तो लोगों की सेहत उससे बेहतर हो सकती है। और दूसरी बात मैं ये कहूंगा, जैसे हम लैंड रिफॉर्म की बात करते हैं, लैंड रिफॉर्म क्योंकि बड़ा तो कोई भी नहीं चाहता कि ये लैंड रिफॉर्म हो जाए, यानी ये जमीनों की तकसीम दोबारा हो जाए। इस पे तो कोई भी जो है ना, हर आदमी जो है ना, वो ये चाहता है कि मेरा जो है ना, मेरी जायदाद में कमी ना हो। इसके लिए तो कोई ऐसा, यानी कोई मुआशरती इनकलाब ही हो सकता है जिसके लिए हम लोगों को इकट्ठे करें और ये आवाज उठाएं, या कोई इस तरह का सिस्टम जैसे लोकल बॉडीज का है, देहात लेवल पे, यूनियन काउंसिल लेवल पे, इस तरह की बात आए और यहाँ से शुरू हो और ऊपर तक, क्योंकि कोई ऐसा कानून पास हो जाए। और ये उसी तरह मुमकिन है कि जब कोई इनकलाब की सूरत जो है ना, उसी में ये मुमकिन है। अदरवाइज तो बड़े तो कोई भी लैंडलॉर्ड भी नहीं चाहता, इंडस्ट्री भी नहीं चाहता कि मेरी इंडस्ट्री कम हो और मेरी जमीन कम हो। और तो वो तो इसकी हमारी ये बात जो है ना, वो सुनी अनसुनी, ये तो इसको वो दूसरे लफ्जों में कहेंगे कि ये तो सब बकवास है। तो इसके लिए ना कोई इस किस्म का जो है ना, हमें मुतहद होकर ऐसी आवाज उठानी चाहिए जो पूरी दुनिया में हमारी आवाज पहुंच जाए, और सब जो है ना, हम मुतहद होके इस पे अगर कोई हो जाए तो ऐसा मुमकिन हो सकता है। और दूसरी सूरत में ये ऐसा कभी भी मुमकिन नहीं हो सकता। ना तो ना बड़े ये चाहेंगे, ना ये होगा। तो ये उसी सूरत में जब हम सब जो है ना मुतहद होके इस पे आवाज उठाएंगे और अपना हक मांगेंगे, तो फिर ये है कि साडा हक इथे रख। आखिर में वो नारा है हमारा एक, कि साडा हक इथे रख। जब इस तरह मांगेंगे, छीन के लेंगे तो फिर मिलेगा, अदरवाइज नहीं मिल सकता।
So I will again start with this end comment. He said, in Urdu, in Punjabi, they say, "Sada hak," put my rights here, and they kind of demand it. Put my rights here, and so he says, that is what we need. We need to grab our rights. Nobody will give us our rights, and so that is his last comment. But I will just start with the first. He says, if the produce of the farmer, as he produces it, comes from the farmland into directly to the consumers, even then the people who will get the milk or the produce that we have, it will still be beneficial to the health of the people, because what we produce is pure. But because it never goes, when it is taken from our hands, it is distorted and they mix it and make it into something bad. So that is the basic problem. Second thing he talks about is land reforms. He says, we know very well that these big landlords do not want to cut their own inheritance, or the so-called inheritance. They do not want to let it go. And so we want, well, the term he uses is inqilab. Inqilab in English means revolution. He says there has to be a social revolution where people have to stand up and take control. Without that, nothing is possible. We have to have a very united force of workers and peasants. United, he says, he doesn't say anything. He says we all need to be united such that our voices reach the ends of the world everywhere, and that is how we will take control. He says there is only way that farmers' voices will be heard is when the local state governments are speaking for the people, and that cannot happen without a revolution. The local state control can only be if there is a revolution. And so he ends with "Sada hak kithe rakh," meaning give me my right now, and I will come and grab my right, because I know you will not give me right. So thank you. That's what he said.
Thank you so much, Azra ji, and thank you so much, Chaudhary Aslam Sahab. Sada haq ethe rakh. Literally, this is
थैंक
going to
यू
be a
वेरी
slogan
मच,
here also.
बहुत शुक्रिया जी, बहुत शुक्रिया।
Bilkul, thank you. And here also in India also, like the farmers have been protesting for one of the key demands is the legal right for minimum support price for the produce. They're talking about minimum support price, where in every other sector people are trying to get as much as profit, make mint as much profit as possible. And if you look at the COVID pandemic, year like last year, for instance, one of the most essential service was food. Most essential service was food, and people have realized that how important food is what nourishes life, what sustains life. And the irony is that the farmers are struggling against corporate might, against corporate capture of the governance, like to get their legal guarantee of minimum support price, not even optimal, like minimum support price. Even that is what is being denied to majority of the farmers in India. So thanks a lot for to all our panelists, and let us hope that we will have agriculture reforms which are socially just and ecologically sustainable in Pakistan, in other countries, globally. We all are united and in this struggle. So with these words, I will hand over to Christina Sason, our co-host for this broadcast. Peasants Rise Up. Sadahak Etherak.
Sadahak. So I don't know if I pronounced that wrong. I apologize. It was okay. So thank you so much, Bobby Ramakan. And of course, it is the same here in the Philippines, where things have been getting a little bit crazy, especially with the COVID pandemic allowing for militarization and for a lot of other um, oppressive forces to come into play. And speaking of which, the next episode for the Peasants Rise Up is going to be in the Philippines. So watch out for that. And thank you so, so much for our wonderful panelists. And we hope to see you next time.
बहुत शुक्रिया जी सब लोगों का,
आपका
बहुत
भी
अच्छी
बहुत
मीटिंग हुई है,
शुक्रिया।
और
Thank you.
बहुत शुक्रिया जी, बहुत शुक्रिया।
Sadahak Etherak.
हाँ, साडा कहते हैं। It is the last my word.